Trade deadline season is fast approaching, and there's no better way to celebrate than for us to bring on a couple of our friends, one member from every single Canadian market, in order to discuss their teams and how they should be approaching the trade deadline.
So let's jump right into Montreal. We are joined by Andrew Berkshire today, our fabulous friend. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Had a great day today. We celebrated my birthday late with the family. We just weren't feeling well last weekend, so we had some nice birthday dinner tonight and birthday cake, and the kids went to bed happy. So all good here.
Amazing. Well, happy belated birthday. And I gotta ask, how do you hope the Montreal Canadiens celebrate your birthday over the next couple of weeks? Are you looking for, or what do you think they're gonna do? Give me an elevator pitch on what you think the sitch is gonna be in terms of like buying, selling, standing pat for the Montreal Canadiens. Go.
They've got to sell. They know this. There's some names on there that were actually surprising. Jordan Harris. He's a young player who can benefit a lot of teams. So if he goes on the market, that's a potential large return. But the biggest thing right now is the Canadians are in a very important stage of their rebuild. I think they're in a stage where they need to make the moves that they make this summer count in a big way. They need to be bigger moves. And in order to facilitate those moves, they need to move out some contracts that last into next year. So they've got to do their very best between now and the deadline and then into the summer to move out contracts like Christian Dvorak, Yoel Armia, uh, Josh Anderson, if they possibly can, which I doubt, but you never know. Stuff like that to get it done.
For sure,
Man, if only Joshua Anderson had a Stanley Cup, because I feel like teams would scoop him up if that were the case.
I'm glad you mentioned kind of the state of the rebuild here. As far as obviously that was kind of what you would like to see. I'm curious as to see what your prediction will be, because we've already seen, Kent Hughes move out Sean Monahan, and looking at the cap friendly for the Canadians, it doesn't seem like they have many pending UFAs yet. As you said, they do need to move out of some contracts. What would you predict will end up happening in the coming weeks?
Well, likely nothing that dramatic. I think they have another slot where they can retain salary, which is good. So they could retain salary on a guy like Yoel Armia, who's actually having a fantastic season. He's kind of been the best of what he can be as Jets people. Yoel Armia is a very frustrating player to watch, but he's been great this year, especially defensively. So I think there is value for him on the market. I think they could trade him, but I think Kent Hughes is also a lot more patient than I am. So a lot of those guys who are on deals next year, we've heard whispers that Kent Hughes may not trade Savard this year, even though there actually is a market for him because he's so good around the team that they see the value in keeping him for one more year and don't expect the fall off to be dramatic enough to lose the capital that they would get. But that's kind of Kent Hughes's thing. He waits until he gets the offer that he wants. So sometimes there's a big move like Sean Monahan or the Tyler Toffoli trade or Arturi Lehkonen, and sometimes not much happens because he's very patient and he's not willing to move down, I would say.
Yeah, I'm curious. Are there any particular I know it's hard when you're a team that looks to sell, oftentimes what you're doing is selling up guys to bring in picks and things like that. But with the Montreal Canadiens, they're a team that's been in this rebuilding stage for a few years now. So you may be looking also a little bit at young players. Maybe this is a bad conversation topic to bring up if you're looking to ship out guys like Jordan Harris, but obviously the Montreal defensive backlog is a bit of a different area, not so deep on the center position, for example. Are there any really young players out there that you think maybe a team who is in that contending era might be looking to part with, that you would be interested in gathering in exchange for some of your players like the Savards and Armias of the world that you're talking about?
I mean, there's definitely players that are being talked about that are interesting. Like there always are, and I think Kent Hughes is very open to the idea of trying to get players back in those trades. I think he's pretty much done that in every trade that he's made, except for the Sean Monahan trade, where it's been a pick and something if it was going to be a pick. So yeah, I think they're always looking for that. They've done like finding young players on teams like Kirby Doc, Alex Newhook, looking for a new opportunity. We hear rumors about Trevor Zegras. I think the price is going to matter a lot more uh, than necessarily the player because they have so many assets that they can pay a high price, but I don't think that they're willing to punt on picks for players that they don't fully believe in. So I think they're a very choosy team. They're very, very careful, and it's interesting to watch, really.
For sure. The one thing I'm looking at here too, in regards to, not having as many players who are, the Sean Monahans, the kind of big ticket players, but do have a lot of role players on the roster here that you could potentially sell off of. Could you maybe like think of some sort of some playoff bound teams and certain players that may be a fit with Montreal, whether it be if they do have those younger players who you might want in return, or just in general going, hey, this team could use a good penalty killer like Joel Armia is.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of teams, players on the Canadians can fit. I think Yoel Armia would probably fit pretty well in Colorado. Colorado kind of plays a much more advanced version of the way that the Canadians have played, and if he could slot in there, I think that helps. Jake Allen, I'm surprised hasn't been moved. The goalie market's been so weirdly soft this year. There are goalies available, and teams have been unwilling to bite. But I still think Jake Allen could be a good fit in Edmonton as a veteran guy to back up Stu Skinner in the playoffs if he falters. Same with New Jersey. Like New Jersey still can't get a save. They're way too good to be so far out of the playoffs. They should be in the mix with like the top teams in their division. So I don't know how that trigger hasn't been pulled, whether it's for Jake Allen or somebody else. So there are players available that can help teams as like specific teams. I think my tunnel vision has been so focused on goalies this year, as with the rest of Montreal media, because they've carried three all season, that there's less focus on where other players that could be traded could fit.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so little exercise, little game, a twofold question here. So it is March 9th, 2024. Trade deadline is over. We don't have any Evgeny Dadonov trades that are being blocked and returned and undone and all these things. First question, which players do you think are gone from the Montreal Canadiens? And then obviously the next question, which players do you hope to be gone from the Montreal Canadiens? Or assets. I'll open it up to anything like that. But what do you think and what do you hope? And are those things different?
Oh, they're way different because I mean, when you're hoping, you're dreaming, right? And I think for the Montreal Canadiens to move forward in their rebuild at a more advanced pace, they need to move Josh Anderson. And the problem with Anderson is he kind of sinks every line that he's on, which can hurt prospect development when you start bringing in more of these young players. So I think having a guy who just continually is an anchor, you can have bad players that work in good situations, right? Anderson has not found a line in what 3 or 4 years now in Montreal that works. It's over, it's done. They got to move on, but it won't happen. I expect it'll be somebody like Savard or maybe Jake Allen on the off chance that move. Very slight chance of UL Armia. I think teams might wait till next year to see if he keeps it up, but I think it's gonna be a pretty quiet deadline overall for Montreal. The
For sure.
Monahan move was the big one.
And having mentioned that too, like I'm curious what your opinion on is on this, because with having already traded away your big fish that you've got, would you consider that this trade deadline is more important for the future of the Montreal Canadiens, or would you be looking more at how the offseason can impact? Because I feel like this offseason is probably going to be filled with a lot of trades, considering the UFA market really isn't there. Do you picture, potentially Kent Hughes maybe waiting on some of those guys to have a little bit more time to breathe in the offseason? Or do you think now is the time to strike?
I think they need to move enough now so that they have room to strike more aggressively in the summer, if that makes sense. As soon as that cap goes up, they have a ton of cap space that they can weaponize in whatever way they desire. They can take on bad contracts for prospects or picks. They can go after a UFA. And I do think that the Montreal Canadiens are becoming a more attractive situation because the reputation of the organization has improved so much. But overall, the summer is far more important. I think specifically the draft. There might be some big moves at the draft. I'm not even sure if they'll make their big pick in the top 10 there. It depends on where they land, of course, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them trade it.
Well, it sounds like it might be an interesting next couple of months for the Montreal Canadiens. So it'll be interesting to see if the deadline is as quiet as you're predicting, or if they make some interesting off the board decisions or moves or anything like that. Like you were saying, Kent Hughes, always playing some 8D chess over there. So it would be interesting to see if he thinks that any move out there is worth his while. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you coming and taking the time and talking Montreal Canadiens. We're going to talk about lots of other Canadian cities in this episode as we continue. So Andrew, Brady, thanks for your time.
Another huge thank you goes out to Andrew Berkshire for joining us today. But let's move on over to another team in the Atlantic, a bit of a different situation. We're talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we've got our good buddy Mike Stevens joining us from the Staff and Graph podcast to chat a little bit about the Leafs. Alrighty, and we're going to move on over now to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I am joined by one of my favorite people in the world, the good, the great, the lovely Mike Stevens, obviously of Staff and Graph, writing elsewhere as well too. Mikey, thank you for joining me today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. How are you feeling these days?
I'm good, man. Look, it's always a pleasure whenever I get the request from you to come on one of your shows. I look forward to it all day. It's great. So this is lovely. We get to talk about the second most interesting team in Canada.
The third most interesting team, in my opinion.
Did Winnipeg get two teams now?
No, I think the Canucks are a little more interesting right now. At least. Wow. But anyways, as Mikey said,
Western bias.
I do have a Western bias, and I used to be a Canucks fan. But as Mikey said, we're going to be chatting about the Leafs. So, Mikey, this has been a really interesting season for the Leafs. Obviously, big changes with management, some interesting signings in the offseason that some kind of panned out, some haven't. I'm just curious, first of all, what's your kind of temperature check on the team right now? How are you feeling about the Leafs as well as their chances going forward into the playoffs this year?
Look, it's impossible not to feel good about the Leafs right now. I mean, they're on a 7-game winning streak, which is the most they've had since I was in grade 3, I believe, which is crazy. Which is also coincidentally, up until last year, the last time they'd won a playoff series. So it's a weird franchise to, stake your livelihood into, but it's interesting. Anyway, yeah, look, it's impossible not to be high on them right now. I mean, Ilya Samsonov has really turned things around. They went 5-0 without Morgan Riley after he was wronged by the Department of Player Safety for doing nothing wrong. He deserved at least a couple games there. But look, and you know what, to be fair, they've unlocked, I was really low on Sheldon Keefe. Flashback to maybe 2-3 weeks ago, I was really low on Sheldon Keefe. I mean, I wrote in my sort of postseason, reaction to their elimination in Florida last year, sort of the post game elimination column, that they can't move forward with Keefe. He's just not the right coach for them. But, and although it took him forever to make this happen, he does seem to have unlocked the Leafs forward lines, which has really helped. I mean, he spent the entire sort of, I guess, first 2/3 of the season, really, depending on however you want to classify it here now, not trusting Max Domi. And look, I get it. Don't trust Max Domi. But he finally put him into the top 6, kind of out of necessity after everyone on the Leafs was pooping their pants with a sickness. There was a bug going around the team, and it worked out really well. And so now he's dropped Tavares to the third line. You got Domi on the second line. It's allowed them to sort of just stack different usages on different people, and also give them 3 scoring lines, which I think is kind of the cheat code for a team that wants to go far. Is if you have 3 scoring lines, you're going to 3 legit scoring lines. That's something that a lot of teams don't have. And that gives you obviously a matchup, we want to call it sort of trump card there. It's really unlocked a lot of stuff. It's unlocked Tyler Bertuzzi, that's for sure, because now he's playing with Nylander and with Domi, and there's a lot more speed on that line. And then on defense, I mean, they've just been nailed with injuries and just completely unjust suspensions, as we just talked about.
Yeah.
And but the fact is, a lot of guys have been stepping up. Timothy Liljegren stepped up considerably. We were having quite the conversations in certain group chats, you and me, Brad, about how Liljegren wasn't even looking that great, and then he comes up and he gets sort of thrust into the top 4, and he was playing so well that they kept Riley with William Lagesson just so they wouldn't sort of yeah, exactly.
For everyone else who doesn't pay attention, who
Like that's how good things were going. So they didn't want to upset the chemistry. So they literally kept Morgan Riley with William Lagesson in his first game back just to sort of keep that nucleus together. Things are going well. And it's impossible not to sort of be behind them right now. Do they need more reinforcements kind of? Like do they need certain I would say different pieces to really make a run? Yes, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Well, yeah, I was about to say, well, first of all, I'm going to ask you kind of both what you think, like how they're viewing the team, as well as then I'll ask your opinion. So first off, just how do you think that, having, Brad Treliving, a new GM, we have no kind of previous assessment to how he would deal with the trade deadline for the Leafs. How do you think that he's looking at this team approaching the trade deadline? And do you think that they will be taking more of a, an adding role? They're going to be buying? Do you think they'll be standing pat? I would imagine they're not going to be selling, considering, as you said, the recent success. What do you think management has in mind right now?
Well, man, like I said, you flash back to, I would say, sort of like late January, like only maybe a month or maybe even like 3 weeks ago. And this is a different conversation because there were some serious conversations around the team that maybe not selling, but stand pat or not buying, not going for it. And I think that's ridiculous. It's when you have Austin Matthews, you freaking go for it every year. But now they're definitely going to go for it. They're not. It would take a massive fish for them to trade their first round pick. They know, like they don't have seconds for this year or next. And they only have 1/3. And then after that, there's like basically they really went out on a shopping spree last year at the deadline and really short up that roster, but they spent a lot of assets to do it. A lot of futures. They basically didn't give up any roster players other than Sandin and Engvall, and they weren't even for the biggest ads. But they want to keep their first. So if they're able to get guys by either packaging sort of like these quad A players or sort of prospects that won't really that are good, but like obviously won't make the team in the immediate future. I think of an Alex Steves, for example, or even like a Roni Hirvonen, who's a little bit more than that. I think they'll make that happen. I know I know, just not insidery or anything. I mean, I guess sort of insidery. Like they've been going hard on Chris Tanev. They really want him. And I think that we're gonna have a problem here. I know. Well, he makes a ton of sense. Like he is exactly what they need. They need, look, could they add another sort of checking forward a la like Noel Acciari, what they got when they got the deadline last year? Sure, that'd be great. In a perfect world, would they want to get another sort of top 6 center to maybe take some of the load off Max Domi? Sure. But what their real need, and if they don't address this, then we might as well not even pay attention to the playoffs, barring a crazy goaltending spree here like Bobrovsky did, is a right shot top 4 defenseman. They need that. They cannot go out of the trade deadline without that to be or risk not being taken seriously. And Chris Tanev fits that bill as perfectly as you can. Noah Hannafin doesn't want to play in Canada long term, so I'm sure he'd be fine with a rental or whatever. But then if you're not trading your first for a rental, they already did that last year and it did not work. So if you're able to convince the Canucks to do like, I don't know, a third, like the third that you got from the Islanders, like Alex Steves and I don't know, like a fifth or Alex Steves and another prospect or something, then sure, go for it. But they need to find a way to make that work. And they have some pieces to play with. Maybe a team will be interested in Connor Timmins. Maybe a team will be interested in even if they're like, maybe if they sign him to an NHL deal and then trade him like Kiefer Bellows, even he's killing it on the Marlies right now on an AHL deal. And he's still young enough and has a first round pedigree. Maybe they could get something for him. But they do need to buy, and they need to get that top 4 right shot defenseman. They don't even need a ton of offense from him. Like Chris Tanev doesn't bring any offense at all.
Pair that guy with Morgan Riley, and like that's easy peasy. Easy.
Bob's your uncle.
Yeah,
like exactly. You have Jake McCabe's been a revelation. Maybe outside of the first like 20 games, Jake McCabe has been a revelation. They are not even close to where they are right now, given all the injuries that they had to deal with. If he doesn't step up, if he doesn't play the way he is destined to, Morgan Riley is playing really well, but they need that top 4 right shot defenseman. Chris Tanev is exactly what they need, and if they're able to get him for, like I said, that price, because really he's a rental and he's old and he is injury prone. So these are all things that are going against him from a value standpoint. And Calgary, the only reason they haven't traded him right now is because they want a first for him,
he's the guy. He's the guy on the market right now. that
Yeah,
everyone's
well,
looking at.
I would say Hannafin. Like Hannafin's the guy that like if people can land Hannafin, they'll be really, because he needs another contract, but he's like, what is he, like 5 years younger than Tanev, and
Yeah.
has way more offensive potential, and is also like very good in his own end. But Chris Tanev, with the way the Leafs are sort of set up right now, you put him in and that's a legit team. They need him.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only, like, is there any other places on that roster where you would consider an upgrade? Because like I agree with you when you kind of mentioned that maybe trying to take a load off of like Max Domi, but looking at the lines here, it seems like they kind of have their, the wingers for each of these top three lines. I mean, as an outsider, will probably throw question marks over Bobby McMann, but I know Nick Robertson has probably needed to.
Bobby McMann has killed it.
From our conversations we've had, from what I see you guys in the chat talking,
Bobby McMann is a folk hero here now. He is absolutely killing it. Like it's not to get onto a big Bobby McMann rant or anything, but like he has been playing incredible hockey lately.
Fantastic.
I don't know if he's top six. I don't know if he's a top six guy right now, but he has earned. Like if they take him out of the lineup, the city will burn down now.
And again, like looking at this lineup right now, like it seems like they have three lines that by your testament, like seem to be working. So that's key for any type of team going into the playoffs, obviously. But you know what, Mikey, we are out of time here. I want to thank you.
Oh, wow.
It was so quick. Thank you so much for joining me. Obviously, we'll have all of Mikey's links in the description down there. Yeah, thank you, Mikey. You're the best. I love you, buddy.
Of course, man. Anytime.
And once again, a huge thank you goes out to Mikey Stevens for joining us here to chat a little bit about the Leafs. But let's round out the Atlantic Division by chatting with Maude from the Extra Attackers podcast about the Ottawa Senators.
All right, so let's get into what's going on with the nation's capital, the Ottawa Senators. Brady and I are joined by our wonderful friend Maude today, who's going to chat with us about what's going on with the Sens. So Maude, how are you feeling, and where do you think the Sens are at right now?
I'm feeling pretty good. I was actually at the game last night at the time this is being recorded against Vegas, which was a pretty hype game. Got me really pumped up. It's an interesting situation for the Sens here because obviously we're way out of it in terms of the playoffs, but we're finally playing well lately against some really good teams, even though we've had letdowns against bad teams. So personally, I'm actually finally having fun watching the Sens for once, and it had been a while. It was a struggle so far for a lot of this year.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen a couple tweets of people talking about it. It just seems like the Sens way where you play yourself out of a playoff spot and all of a sudden you start playing some real hockey. But do you think that's going to cloud the judgment of the Sens? And do you think it's going to cause them to maybe make some moves that they shouldn't be well positioned to make at this point?
That's the tricky part because the insiders have been saying that the new Sens management wants to acquire like good veteran players and guys who are good in the locker room. But that's a little bit at odds with where we are in the standings because you would just assume that we would be sellers, right? And even a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko, who you could probably get a first round pick plus back for him, he kind of fits the bill of that veteran type player and a guy who like actually has enjoyed his time in the city. So we're a little bit at odds where we want to bring in veteran players, but we're not close to a playoff spot. And then we want to keep maybe a veteran player like Tarasenko. So I don't know which way it's going to go for the trade deadline, whether it'll be more buying or selling, or maybe a mix of both even.
For sure. And what would you say, like, of course, that is what, might happen, but what do you think should happen? If you were in that driver's seat, if you were the one making the decisions, how would you treat the trade deadline as well as going into the offseason for the Sens?
I think if it was me, in terms of like Tarasenko being that biggest piece to potentially sell off, I would probably try to sell him off for a first and maybe, circle back to him in the offseason when you trade him, say like, hey, if you're a UFA again in the summer, let us know if you'd like to come back, because the reports are that he and his family really enjoy it here, which makes it tough. But I probably would sell him for a first, especially since the Sens are going to be losing a first in the next 3 years, thanks to Pierre Dorion. so getting an extra one would be really nice. And then in terms of like after that trade, I would maybe look to maybe flip that first for another player. If you could get a player with term or a player who would be interested in extending here, so maybe a little bit of both buying and selling. I think something like that could be interesting.
Yeah, and looking at, I just had the cap friendly pulled up, as I'm sure we all do, to talk about this. So a couple of RFAs obviously coming up this offseason, but we also have Dominic Kubalik. Looks like he might be your only other UFA other than Tarasenko coming up. What do you think the plan is with him?
they have been trying to move him for at least 2 months now, according to reporters like Bruce Garrioch, and it's just teams are not biting. I would have to assume that if he does get moved, it will be for a very like late round pick. Um, I don't even know if a team necessarily going to the playoffs would really be interested in him for depth. Maybe he just ends up going to a weaker team that needs some goal scoring help if they have forward injuries or something like that. But he's definitely on the outs. He's been on the fourth line and getting scratched all the time, so he really hasn't been a fit in Ottawa. So they're definitely still looking to move him for anything if they can. And like you mentioned, some of the RFAs as well. I would say a low-key candidate to potentially be moved is I do think Eric Branstrom's time in Ottawa is probably coming to an end soon. Maybe not at the trade deadline, but potentially in the offseason too, just because I think they're really going to roll with Chabot, Sanderson, and Chikrin as those left D, and I feel like they might be looking for more of a veteran to replace Brandstrom. I feel like he hasn't really taken the next step forward this year, and new management being like not the guys who brought him into the organization, I think they might move on from him.
For sure. And, as an outsider, we hear, this and that about Ottawa. I've seen a lot, prior to their recent play, I've seen a lot of talk about, maybe they're considering trading one of their core pieces. I'm curious what your opinion is on that, if there's anyone in particular you'd look at, or if you think that is just people saying stuff, reporters doing their jobs,
So a lot of people try to say that we should trade Thomas Chabot, but then his last 20 games or so have been like absolutely fantastic in my opinion. So that's something that I would not do. The more recent rumor has been Josh Norris. A couple days ago, there was a lot of rumors of other teams calling the Sens about him. He was in like a pretty long goal drought, but at the time of recording, he does have 3 goals in the last 2 games now. So then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my God, he's fine, guys. We have to keep him. But it could be maybe a case of his trade value increasing with a hot streak. So I think Norris will be an interesting guy to watch in terms of if they move someone from the core, just because of slightly decreased point production this year, although he is coming off a major injury. He missed almost all of last year. But I think if there is a core piece to maybe be moved, I would keep an eye on him just because he's got a very large cap hit already, and we're not really sure if he's going to live up to it.
For
Yeah,
sure.
no, that's interesting. And I think there are on his deal at least like what 4 years left, maybe even a little
7.
bit more. It's
Yeah,
what?
7.
7
Yep.
years.
They
At
signed him
7.95, right?
Signed him right before last year, before the
Right.
injury.
I didn't realize that's how long of a deal was. Dang. Okay. Well, don't listen to me. 7 years. Wow. Okay. So that it would be a really interesting one to see moved so early into that deal. It'd be interesting. But on the flip side of things, are there any pieces that are out there that you would be interested in seeing the Sens bring in this upcoming trade deadline?
Yeah, the number one for pretty much all of the Sens fan base from what I'm seeing online is Yusei Saros potentially being on the block. To be honest, if I was Nashville, I don't know why they would be trading him right now unless they get a huge haul for him. You'd think that they would want to hang on for him for a couple more years until Askarov is really ready to take over as the starter, but his name is in trade conversations, and it really feels lately like goaltending is what the team really needs an upgrade on. So I don't know what it would cost. It's tough to gauge the trade value for a goalie, especially one of the best goalies in the league over the last few years in Saros. But from a perspective of a fit on the team, Saros would be my number one option.
And I'm personally I'm just really curious about your opinion on the direction of the team, because this is a team that has been really young. They have kind of come into their own. You've got some great stars in Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk. And yet it seems like it hasn't really clicked around it. Do you think it's more of a case of trying to figure out who the right pieces are to fit around those guys? Or do you think that the Sens, the Sens are in this kind of weird middle where they're trying to do you think that they need a retool, or do you think that they, need to just kind of put more eggs in the basket?
The farther that we get into this season and the more we're seeing improved play from the team overall as a 5-man unit, it seems more apparent to me that coaching was the main issue. And I think that if they had made the move away from DJ Smith sooner in the season, we potentially could have been closer to a wildcard spot by now, because you're really seeing the team buy into Jacques Martin's system, even though it took a little while. Like the first couple of weeks under him were still really rough, but we've seen a huge improvement since then. So in my mind, regardless of whether or not Martin continues as coach next year, they might be bringing in someone else to replace him for more of a long-term option. But if whoever the next coach is can keep the team playing how they are now, like I would be totally cool with going into next season with majority the same core players, giving them one more shot. And if they flop at the start of next season again, then in my mind, that's where you start really disrupting the core. But maybe it's just a little bit of hopium, but I'm like, okay, they're showing us that they have the capability. It's just whether or not they can do it over the course of a full season, which they haven't been able to do yet. So like I wouldn't rush to blow up the core. It's possible we see a core piece traded at the deadline, but I would give them a bit more time personally.
Yeah, no, that I think that makes sense. And I feel like no one ever really wants to give up on their core unless your team rhymes with the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? So but just to kind of close out the episode, there are a couple of names of some sends that some people have been talking about. Maybe it's more wishful than anything else, but obviously some teams who are looking to buy right now are talking about the idea of maybe bringing in someone like Claude Giroux as a little bit of a longer term rental, or a Jacob Chychrun and guys like that are just those really appealing pieces to a team that's looking to contend. Do you have any inkling that any of these players could possibly be on the trading block for the right move, or do you think that a lot of these guys are staying put?
In terms of Giroux, I think he really loves it here, and I don't think he would want to move just yet. Maybe if we stink again next season, and then he'll be, I think, on the last year of his contract at that point, then maybe he goes to chase another cup at next year's deadline. But I think right now, it's not the time for it yet. In terms of Chychrun, I could see him getting moved, but I feel like it's more of an off-season situation where you would probably want to do more of like a player-for-player hockey trade, like maybe Chychrun in for like another team's right-handed defenseman or something like that. And I don't know if you'll find a deal like that at the trade deadline. So I think he could be moved. Maybe you sell him off for draft picks and prospects, and then you flip those for another defenseman. I could see that being a possibility. I don't think Chychrun's future here is necessarily set in stone.
Perfect. And well, can I interest you in a lightly used Neil Pionk? Potentially, maybe throw in a little Logan Stanley sweetener.
I don't know.
No, I wouldn't subject you to that. But you know what? This is pretty much all the time we do have. Thank you so much for joining us here. We will be moving on to the next team in the list. We're not sure what the order is, but thank you so much for joining us, Maude.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And once again, a huge thank you goes out to Maude from the Extra Attackers podcast. Make sure to check out their stuff in the description. But anyways, let's kick it back over to the West Coast. Let's move on over to Calgary, where Auddie James is joining Liz to chat a little bit about the Calgary Flames.
Awesome. So let's talk Calgary Flames. I got my good pal Auddie James here. We're gonna talk a little bit of Calgary Flames hockey here. Auddie, how you doing? And more importantly, we don't care about you. How are the Flames doing?
Yeah, I wouldn't care about me either, given the state of this Calgary Flames team. I am doing well. Thank you for asking. How are the Flames doing? It's, I don't know. They're on a bit of a, I don't want to call it a bit of a heater lately, but they've been playing some pretty darn good hockey. They're getting some great goaltending, which might be keeping them alive in this whole playoff race thing. But there's a lot of question marks heading into this trade deadline season in the Calgary Flames. It's going to be quite the next month here in Calgary.
Oh, I believe you, and it's
Crazy.
already gotten started. It's
yes.
Obviously we first saw the Lindholm train. That was one of the big names on the chopping block there for the Calgary Flames that we were expecting to see get shipped out of there. How did you feel about that trade?
That was you know what? I think a lot of people were pretty happy with that return for Elias Lindholm. I personally didn't think it would be that rich, if that makes sense. I'm not saying it was an overpay or an underpay or anything like that, but I definitely wasn't expecting that many pieces coming back. Andrei Kuzmenko, who fit in, he's kind of been on a bit of a slump lately and kind of trying to find his spot here on this team, but he's a player who can score a boatload of goals. We saw that a couple of years ago in Vancouver. That was a nice piece coming back. That first round pick that's very coveted in this in this draft. It's going to be a late pick because the Canucks are an absolute wagon right now. But it's still a first round pick nonetheless. Hunter Berkovich. I can't even remember how to pronounce his name. Bruskovich. I'm going to butcher it if I keep trying here. Hunter. We're going to call him Hunter. By all accounts, by people who are way smarter than me and who know the OHL and their prospects way better than I do, have this guy poised to be a pretty good NHLer. So, excited. It was a good return. I think we can all be happy when we see a combination of, young-ish roster players, first round draft picks, and pretty decent level prospects coming back for a guy who didn't want to stay in Calgary.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the nice part about it all, right? Is that, it's a piece that you might have lost for nothing had you done nothing with it for the next little bit. So even if you got in a bag of pucks, at least it's something. And it looks
Yeah.
like it's a return that could work out decently. And it has been okay so far. So
That's
we're
right.
hoping to see, for the Calgary Flames' sake, a similar return for some of the other players that they have. And if you look at Cap Friendly right now and you look at the column of the next upcoming season, we see a lot of those red UFA blocks there on the page, which means there are a lot of pieces that still could move out of Calgary. Some of the big names that we hear, most importantly and most commonly, I think, is the Chris Tanev name. Obviously, there's a little bit of conversation about some Anderson, some Hanifin, a couple other guys like that. Right now, we're sitting here right at the end of February. Who do you think are the players that are going to no longer be Calgary Flames come whatever it is, 3 p.m. on trade deadline day?
I think it's a lock that Noah Hanifin will be somewhere in the United States with probably an extension in place. I know that there's been some chatter amongst the Vegas Golden Knights, Tampa Bay Lightning, and New Jersey Devils, who are on a bit of a slump right now, could use some backhand help. And he wants to go. It's a pretty well known fact around these parts that he wants to go play in the U.S. He wants to head south of our beautiful border here and go back to his motherland. So I would say Hanifin is a lock to be dealt at some point between now and the trade deadline. Chris Tanev has generated a lot of interest. Teams like Toronto, teams like Dallas, really interested in a guy like Chris Tanev, 34 years old, but that's a warrior on the back end, and a lot of teams would really covet a player like him on their back end. So I would say it's pretty much a lock that those two guys are gone. And another one too, I don't know how much attention you've been paying to the Calgary market or anything like that. So correct me if I'm telling you something you already know, but a lot of smoke recently around Jacob Markstrom. He's got 2 years left on his deal after this one. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. 2 years left on his deal after this one, but a team that especially is in the mix is the New Jersey Devils, who, as of today, we're recording right now on February 25th. They just dropped another one 4-1 to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they're going through a rotation of guys like Nico Doss, Schmid, whoever the hell else they're gonna strap the pads on. But obviously they're missing. There's a deal to be made there, Liz. There's a deal to be made there between the Calgary Flames and the New Jersey Devils that could involve both Noah Hanifin and Jacob Markstrom. Whether or not the Devils are in full panic mode and want to pay a premium for a couple of guys, and maybe Hanifin with an extension, that's a different story. But I think there's a deal to be made there. If there's when there's smoke, there's fire, and there's been a lot surrounding Jacob Markstrom and the Devils. The Flames just actually finished their swing of New Jersey and the New Yorks. And there was a report that came out that Jacob Markstrom wasn't sure if he was going to be getting back on the team charter with the Calgary Flames. That's how close they were to a deal with the Devils. So I don't know. As these woes keep happening in New Jersey, I think that there's a better chance that they try to obtain Markstrom or Hanifin or both. So we'll see where that goes. But there's a lot of pieces here in Calgary that could be on the outs. The only thing that's really keeping them afloat or motivated to not do that is they're 2 points out of a wild card spot right now. But you deal some of these guys and those chances are going to get slimmer and slimmer because Jacob Markstrom's a big reason why they're in that spot. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think, holy smokes, a Hanifin Markstrom package would be quite the blockbuster. But
could you imagine?
It could be an interesting fit. I have a personal vendetta against the New Jersey Devils, and maybe I should be thanking them, but they were one of the teams that this offseason didn't see the value in bringing in a guy like Connor Hellebuck. So I get to point a little ha-ha finger at them because it's like, yeah, you know what? You do need a goaltender. And like you said, Markstrom's been performing lately, which is good for him. I know it's and people have made some jokes about how he might actually really excel in New Jersey because he seems to do better when his team is a tire fire in front of him defensively, which someone else can fill in the blanks on what I'm saying about the New Jersey Devils there. But we got a couple other guys in the back end that I don't think, obviously Oliver Shillington's had a little bit of an interesting season, and then we also have I'm trying to look at this cap friendly here. We got Jordan Osterley is also a name that has a deal that's coming up this summer. Do you foresee any movement with those two guys?
No, I think Jordan Osterley is probably one of those guys that The way I looked at it, Jordan Osterley was a Shillington replacement early when Shillington reported to camp. All signs were kind of pointing that he would start the season with the team. He wasn't ready. His mental health wasn't there. So he did take an extended leave into this season. He came back about a month ago, made his debut this season. So I don't think Osterley, he's been up and down on waivers a couple times. I don't think he's a guy that really moves the needle if you bring him back. Oliver Shillington, though, I would be utterly shocked if they move on from him. This is a guy who they've invested a lot of time in, and a guy who loves this team, who loves what Calgary's been able to do for him, the stability they've been able to provide for him while he deals with his personal struggles. I would be utterly shocked if they moved on from him and there's not an extension into next season. And not to mention, he's been playing pretty damn good after coming back from his mental health leave. Scored his first goal there a couple nights ago against, I believe it was the Bruins. But either way, just a guy who, when he's on, he's on. Offense first guy, can really skate, and kind of fits into that age group that the Flames, I think, are trying to get more in that category. Not super young, not super old, but a guy who I think the team values, and he values what the organization has done for him. So I don't think there's anything there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But maybe that's a good segue into the conversation of, the Calgary Flames are looking to get some things in return. And they appear to be in the driver's seat, in my opinion, with a lot of these deals coming up, because there are going to be some people looking for these players. Not a huge UFA market coming up this summer. So there are going to be some people who aren't looking for those players with term that are really going to be bidding out for those guys on those shorter term rentals. So I think the Calgary Flames have a lot of potential to make some moves in the next little bit. Are there any pieces, blue chip prospects, young guys out there that you're looking at that you could see being an interesting fit, maybe from the New Jersey Devils or maybe from someone else that you think you'd like to see be brought into your roster?
Reportedly, for the Markstrom deal, at least, it was reported that Alexander Holtz was one of the bigger young pieces coming back. And that's something the Flames they should, but ownership and all that play into account. And the owner in this city loves a couple games of playoff revenue. So there's a good chance they don't even, acquire as much young talent as they should at this trade deadline, and try to get pieces that can push them into the playoffs. But I digress. That's a whole different story. Alexander Holtz is a big one that I think if there's a deal to be made with the Devils, that's a piece I want back 100%. I know they're probably going to be trying to get some first round picks in there too, some more magic beans in the draft. As for youth, a lot of the teams that are involved, and that's, I'm going to focus on youth because that's where I think the Flames need to try to trend towards. The teams involved for Noah Hanifin, I haven't really done much of a deep dive on the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Vegas Golden Knights, but these are two teams that we know who they have drafted and developed very well. But right now, with both of those teams being, perennial buyers, I don't really know what the cupboards look like without, people, like I say, smarter than I am in those fields kind of telling me who's good, who's not good. So I don't really know from a youth standpoint what kind of blue chip prospects those two teams can provide. But I would be really interested if there is a deal to be made with New Jersey, if Alexander Holtz. I know some people have thrown out Simone Nemec as well, but I don't think that the Devils are going to move on from him. But Holtz would probably be right now the biggest piece for me that I'd like to see come back for Calgary.
Yeah, definitely. It's so funny. I just, the Calgary Jets. Well, that's exactly it.
You could call them that.
And the Winnipeg Jets are kind of twin flames in a lot of situations here. And I don't mean that as a pun with the whole, our owner likes a couple games of playoff revenue. Alexander Holtz might come back in this goalie trade. Yeah, I feel like we're two peas in a pod here. But
we've talked about this on previous shows that you and I have been on in the past, how little brother, big brother these two teams are. It's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's quite interesting. But let's finish it off with a little fun kind of crazy question here. Like, obviously GMs are a little bit more they're very calculated in what they do, but as armchair GMs we don't have to be. What would be a crazy move or a crazy player that you'd love to bring into this team at this upcoming deadline if you had the controls for a little bit?
Oh man. I like to think about a trade with Dallas because I think I think there's a deal to be made there with Chris Tanev. I genuinely think that they would benefit from a guy like that. And they have what an interesting team, hey? The Dallas Stars and how they've
Oh,
got
dude,
such
yeah.
a good mix of youth with, vets like Pavelski, vets like, Seguin, who, can still provide a little bit, but just a well-balanced team from top to bottom. And they
Get them
interest me
out of
the
my
most.
division. Ugh.
Right? Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel for you. Um, Genuinely, but I don't know. I feel like a dream would be like a guy like Stankoven, who just came up, I think yesterday, made his NHL debut.
Did he actually
Um,
get to? They've been yo-yoing
I
that poor boy, so
they have. I actually don't know. Maybe he hasn't. That would just be pretty on brand for that whole story. But even like a Wyatt Johnston or any of those young pieces from Dallas would be like my dream. If Craig Conroy is able to pull something off like that, give that man the key to the city. If he's able to bring in players like that, then this is the guy I want running this team. But yeah, I feel like just any like big youth names. Like I feel like that's what a lot of Flames fans really want. Whether or not that's the direction they're going to go, like we talked about, we could spend hours and hours talking about ownership and their playoff revenue and all that.
oh, of
Everything's
course.
got to get approved from them. So
Yeah.
if they approve a slight, we don't say the R word, rebuild around here in Calgary. Retool would probably be a little bit more on brand, but if they approve something like that, then yeah, maybe some youth. We'll see how they can make some moves and inject that into a team that's needed it for so damn long.
100%, yeah, and like you said, the rebuild is a scary type of concept to some of these smaller market teams, and so there is the exciting piece that they may be more interested in bringing in prospects as opposed to picks because they're closer to wanting to be competitive sooner rather than later. So it'll
Yeah.
definitely be interesting to see. But I think I've said this to close out most of the segments that we've done that these will be interesting teams to watch because I do think that all of the Canadian teams will have some interesting moves coming up in the next little bit. But Calgary is definitely one. I made the metaphor before. They're in the driver's seat, right? Like they got a lot of those desirable pieces right now. Everyone and their mother wants a strong right-handed defenseman, and those don't grow on trees in the NHL. So
Yeah.
it'll be really, really interesting to see what Craig Conroy does in the next little bit, and to see who comes to the table and what the bids look like, and what the Calgary Flames could restock their cupboards with come mid-March. So Auddie, thank you for joining me for this segment. This is a ton of fun.
As always, huge thank you goes out to Auddie for joining us here. But let's kick it over to Vancouver, where we're going to chat with our good friend Kaja Mae about the number one team in the league, the Vancouver Canucks.
So now we're going to head to the West Coast, and I'll say a sentence that last year at this time I did not think I would say. One of the only teams in Canada that is better than the Winnipeg Jets, the Vancouver Canucks. What a weird phrase to say. Brady and I are joined by our wonderful friend Kaja today to chat about where the Canucks are at and what we think we're going to see from them in the next couple weeks. So, Kaja, pulse check. How are we feeling about the Vancouver Canucks right now?
We're feeling really good. It's kind of surreal. I kept seeing a lot of tweets last night. The Green Men came back, which were a big thing back in the 2010s, yeah. Or early 2010s. And it's a refreshing thing. It still feels so surreal. Like after watching especially the last season, how everything started, and this season it begun kind of 50-50 and then they went on a whole tear, aside from playing the Oilers, but yeah, they don't matter in this conversation. They get into a playoff spot. Are they in a playoff spot? I don't actually know, but you know what, we're first in the league. Don't really care otherwise.
You don't gotta look back. You don't gotta look back. Only looking forward.
Only forward. It's a good pulse check. I do think that they have a good shot at the Western Conference final potentially. They just hit a bit of a rough patch. Last night they beat the Bruins in OT after the Bruins got a too many men penalty. I was watching that while I was timekeeping a rec league, and it was definitely a conversation being had on the ice. It was a great time though, and I'd say overall, yeah, I'd say Western Conference final. Sorry, Western Conference final. We're gonna go to 7 games with the Jets, and I feel like the Jets are gonna go past because
Ooh.
that's like the one team we can't beat. Colorado, I feel like won't get as far, but that's just me saying that. who knows? It's either Colorado or the Jets that are going to be our heel this year.
For sure.
Unless, the Golden Knights in there.
Yeah,
IR magic.
I wouldn't count them out. Especially, I wouldn't count out the Oilers too. But in regards to trade deadline talks, the Canucks, along with the Jets, have already made one of their bigger moves. Obviously, bringing in Elias Lindholm. I'm just curious what your opinion is on how he's kind of integrated into the team, and what they paid for him, and how you just feel on the trade in general.
I think they paid a decent amount for him, especially I thought it was overall a good deal for both teams. Like, we got Lindholm, who we're not exactly sure if they plan to re-sign him, or if he's just going to be a rental. Right now, he's a UFA next year. He's 29. He's been all right so far. With the Canucks, he's put up a few points with the Canucks so far. He's played 11 games with the team. 4 goals, 2 assists for 6 points. He's a -5, averages about 19 minutes a night. I'd say he has a 20% shooting percentage, so that's pretty good. Considering, I don't know, with the trade that we made with Calgary, I'd say Calgary did get, a lot of good pieces. They got one of our better prospects. They got, obviously, Andrei Kuzmenko, who, according to my fantasy app, is now injured, but Calgary's doing pretty good since the trade. Vancouver did hit a bit of a slump. Lindholm, I do think he's fit in pretty well with the team. I haven't seen him make too many egregious errors. So that's been kind of a nice thing. The 2024 first, I'm okay with that. It's a draft pick. Who knows how that's
You
gonna
guys are
turn
first in the
out.
league. You guys
We're
are first in the league. You got to
Yeah.
make some moves,
Who
right?
cares?
Yeah, I said last year I'd rather lose a first round pick than lose Elias Pettersson, which is another conversation
Valid.
that's happening.
Yep.
But and there's also the 2024 fourth that turns into a third if there's the Western Conference final. I'd say, yeah, I thought it was a decent trade. Again, they made a big trade during the All-Star weekend, and again, including an All-Star because Lindholm had to essentially switch sides, even though he was already picked to be on Tate McRae's team because he's from Calgary, or he was from Calgary, whatever. It was totally not scripted that way, but yeah, similar to last year when they traded Horvat on the same weekend, and he had to play for the Pacific Division with the Islanders jersey on, which
It was a crazy time. It
Yeah.
was so funny.
they keep doing it.
We'll keep it rolling just to keep the entertainment factor up, because it's definitely been funny the last couple of years. But do you expect that the Vancouver Canucks are going to make any other trades over the next little bit to sort of shore up this lineup that's sitting atop the league right now?
I'd say that they're not going to make any huge moves. I think their big move was getting Lindholm, and they haven't really made other, obviously they got Lafferty, who's been a decent pickup for them. They got Zadorov, who's been suspended, but also a decent pickup for them. Casey DeSmith in the preseason era, they got him from Montreal. He's been an all right backup for Thatcher Demko. I haven't forgiven him for the Minnesota game yet. But it's I'll see it in my nightmares for years to come. Otherwise, the only semi-big moves that the Canucks made last year were somewhat to sell. They gave Luke Shen back to Toronto. They got a third for him, and this was 3 days before the trade deadline, and then 2 days before the trade deadline on March 3rd. Then on March 1st, they traded away that first round pick they got for Horvat for Filip Hronek, who was injured at the time, and he played 3 games for the Canucks before he basically called it a season and just continued. So I'm not sure they'll make a lot of big moves in the next few weeks or days now. If you look at the date, I'd say they've got a pretty tight team. I think the only worry is right now injuries. Currently Carson Soucy got retroactively moved to LTIR. He's out 6 weeks as of January 22nd. I believe. So should be coming back in the next couple weeks, hopefully, probably around the trade deadline. I know there are rumors about Jake Gensel, but he's also injured now, and I think it was more just because he's a pen. And they also got Lindholm, so I feel like that rumor kind of fizzled away. And Dakota Joshua, who is also a big factor, but on that third line, he's also out with an injury right now, week to week. We don't know the extent of that. We think it was due to a fight, but yeah. Other than that, I think the Canucks are doing pretty well.
So, I know you already said previously that you had aspirations of, at least getting to the Western Conference Final. If you were in the driver's seat here, if you were Patrick Allvin, if you had the choice to make more additions, to make no addition, to just keep with what you have, is there anywhere where you would want to maybe upgrade? I know necessarily we don't think it might happen, but is there any spot where you think might need a little bit more bolstering? And I also noticed that there are a lot of players coming off of contract at the end of the year. So I'm just curious what your opinion is on all that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say maybe defense, but if Carson Soucy comes back, Noah Juulsen likely moves to a 7th D position. Pretty much all of our defense core, except for Noah Juulsen and Quinn Hughes, are UFAs or RFAs at the end of the year. So, I don't know if they'd want to go out and try and get somebody else that's open for a longer term deal. Again, like a lot of the UFAs are probably in their last year with the Canucks. For example, Tyler Myers, most likely, it's his last season making $6 million with the team. And I don't think, unless it's like a way lower deal, they resign him. The decor I think is pretty solid, especially when Soucy comes back. Forward wise, I could see them getting another center, because they do have some younger, more inexperienced centers, and I think they just have a lot of wingers as well, so they could get rid of some. I just don't know what kind of additions you'd make to this team, because they've already shown that they can be very solid. They've shown some lapses, of course, but especially recently. But I think overall this team is a good setup going forward. I'm not sure what trades I'd make unless it was AHL or picks related.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair. And that's where you want to be though when you're doing as well as you are. Your hope is that you trust your own guys and that you don't have to find too many external pieces to come and shake things up ahead of the playoffs. But maybe last quick question before we wrap and move on to the next team. But say you had, your Christmas wish list out here and you had to, some guy on the market, anyone out there. Is there anyone that you'd love to see be brought in to the Vancouver Canucks to help them make this push?
Well, I want to say Luke Shen, but that's just because nostalgia's sake. But he's also on a pretty good deal with Nashville right now, even though they're probably not a playoff team. For the memes, Phil Kessel. I think that's my pick.
Yes.
He's been skating in Abbotsford, but again, he hasn't played since like last April with Vegas. So, because he didn't play in the playoffs, if I remember correctly. But I think he would be kind of just a great vibes-wise, even if he was the 13th forward, just to come in and just for the rest of the season. I think that would be really fun, considering a lot of his former teammates are already playing here, as we're the Vancouver Penguins now, apparently. But
and the Vancouver Jets defense.
Yes,
also true. Yeah, I can't believe you didn't mention the loss of Tucker Pullman to LTIR as well. The guy's been on there for freaking ever. But the Vancouver Canucks are definitely an interesting group to keep an eye out over the next little bit. A lot of people had some questions about their sustainability early on in the season, but they've been riding this high and they've been playing some good hockey. So, not a lot of high danger shots, net front, and all those kinds of things. They really keep the middle of the ice wide open, which is pretty fabulous. And they have some amazing star power up front. So quite the team we got going with the goaltender that might not back up Connor Hellebuyck at the Olympics, right? But sorry, not the time. And just forever the worst tweet I've ever seen. But Kaja, thank you so much for joining us to chat a little bit about the Vancouver Canucks. We'll keep rolling with the rest of these teams here and see what everyone else is up to. But we'll keep an eye on the Vancouver Canucks and maybe we'll run into them in the playoffs. So we shall see on that one. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Big thanks to Kaja, of course. Be sure to check out her YouTube channel. We'll have it linked down in the description. But now it's time to round out the Pacific Division. Of course, we're going to be talking now about the Edmonton Oilers. Liz is going to be joined by our good friend Avry Lewis-McDougall to chat everything about the Oilers heading into this trade deadline.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about a team that, maybe a couple months ago we were a little bit more worried about than we are now. A team that is one of those top 3 teams in the West, and not sure if they're 3, 2, or 1 at this point. But the Edmonton Oilers are in pretty good shape where we're at now at the end of February, and I'm joined by the wonderful Avry from Edmonton himself to come chat with us today. Avry, how are you feeling about the Edmonton Oilers right now?
Right now, I mean, they're still in a playoff spot in the Western Conference, but they've hit a bit of a lull. So I'm not sounding any panic alarms at all. But the lack of consistency now is a little bit, it does feel a little bit weird right now, at least.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's definitely a team that I'm glad I'm not a fan of, in the sense that I feel like there's never a dull moment as an Oilers fan, and I feel like you're always maybe a little bit on edge and all those kinds of things. But how are you feeling about them going into the trade deadline, and what are you thinking that we might see from the Edmonton Oilers in this next stretch?
I think this team is absolutely going to be targeting guys like Chris Tanev, Jake Guentzel, who are going to be their assets to try and get when it comes to improving the forward core and the back end. I know I've talked before in the past about improving goaltending, but I don't think that's going to be a big priority going to a trade deadline. I mean, it'll be nice, but clear that this team is going to focus on improving things up front in front of Stuart Skinner. So I think they're going to try and at least try to get one of Tanev or Jake Guentzel if they can't get both.
Those are some pretty big names that we're seeing out there on the trade market right now. Do you think what do you think their odds are of landing those guys?
Honestly, I think compared to years past, I think they do have really good odds, especially where they're coming from right now. I know the Penguins are in that weird mix of, are they going to go for it? Are they not? They've had a very up and down year. I think Guentzel's going to be the easier guy to try and get to make a deal with Kyle Dubas. I think Calgary still sees themselves as possibly being a bubble team that can get into a wild card spot. And again, we know how rare it is to get any trade between Edmonton and Calgary. So I do think it'll be easier for them to get Jake Guentzel to Edmonton. I think you're probably going to see a deal that might have them trading away either a Cody Ceci or Warren Fogle and a pick to get a Jake Guentzel. And if that's what it takes, then do it tomorrow, I believe.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm always a fan of trying to get a little bit more runway out of these guys when you can. But just looking at the cap friendly right now, it looks like the Oilers do have a lot of kind of self rentals going on right now, especially up at the front end with a couple of their depth pieces. Do you foresee any of those self rentals? Like you mentioned Warren Fogle by name a little bit earlier. Do you think any of those guys might be on the move depending on who the Oilers are trying to bring in to, make the cap work, make the roster spots work? Do you foresee any of those guys, come next week or the week after not being on the Edmonton Oilers anymore?
It wouldn't shock me really. I think these names in terms of the roster guys are gonna possibly be on the move are Fogle, possibly Cody Ceci. Those are the 2 easiest pieces to move. I know I've heard the idea of Dylan Holloway, but I don't think Holloway's a guy they're gonna get dealt. I think Holloway is someone the organization still sees as a key cog going forward for the future organization. So if anyone is gonna get dealt, I think it's gonna be Fogle or a Cody Ceci. Those are the 2 easiest names that I could see dealt. Maybe, possibly a Brett Kulak, but outside those 3 names, if they're gonna trade anything, it's gonna be a draft pick or a prospect, most likely in my mind.
Yeah, are there any prospects that you're thinking right now might be the first on the chopping block? Anyone that you think they're dangling in front of some of the people they're looking to work out a trade with right now?
I think in terms of in trying to get a high player who can help the roster right now, I think you're possibly gonna have to part ways with Bo Aki, who they drafted out of the OHL this past summer. Bo Aki is someone who they might have to part with, possibly Raphael Lavoie or possibly Xavier Bourgault. Those are the prospects that are the highest priority right now in the Oilers farm system. So one of those three, I think, will be the guy that you do trade to make it worth wild for a Pittsburgh or a Calgary to get back a Tanavar Gunsel in my mind.
Yeah, so what do you think, if we're looking at the possibility of both of those pieces moving in, like you kind of mentioned, which I think would be, a fabulous grab for the Oilers, what do you expect the packages would look like? Because obviously you mentioned a couple of assets that are good looking, but you can only use them up once, right? They gotta go to one team. So what do you think if you had to build up a package for both of those teams, what the returns for the Penguins and the Flames might look like?
Honestly, I think if I'm Ken Holland, and again, this is me trying to play Ken Holland, honestly, I think you're looking at giving up first round pick. Definitely, I think the first round pick is something that both teams are gonna want back. You're gonna have to sacrifice that. It is what it is. But when you're in a win now mode like Edmonton is, you can get part ways with a first round pick back. So I think that's gonna go to either Calgary or Pittsburgh. I think it's gonna be a prospect and one roster player. I know some might say it's a bit of an overpay, but if you're gonna get back guys who are going to be instant game changers to help on the back end, like Chris Tanev helping out with Darnell Nurse, I think would be an amazing look, an amazing upgrade on someone like a Cody Ceci to help. And Tanev, Nurse, Bouchard, Ekholm, it's a lot better going forward. So I think you're definitely giving up at least three pieces: a draft pick, a prospect, and a roster player to either the Flames or the Penguins. And it sounds steep, but if it results in Edmonton going to a cup final or winning the cup, personally, to me, I think that's worth it.
Oh, 100%. And that's always the piece that you look at there, right? And I think that the piece that you mentioned about the Darnell Nurse thing is really interesting, and that is a really important thing for people to keep in mind, and to always draw parallels to the Jets experience. People talk about Dylan DeMello and stuff like that. And yeah, he's a good player, and these are the things that he does on his own, whatever. But his cap hit in and of itself is worth it for what he does to help Josh Morrissey as well. And that complementary piece and what it can bring out of other parts of your roster can never be undervalued. So that's a really important piece, and that can be really interesting to see what an interesting D pair would look like for someone like Darnell Nurse. But say you're not Ken Holland, say you're you, and you get to have a little bit of fun out there. What are some, obviously the fact that Edmonton actually is tied to the names of some of these big pieces will make the trade deadline probably pretty interesting. But are there any kind of off the board picks or maybe outside of the box thinking players that you're interested in or that you would be really keen to see happen, even if you don't think they're necessarily too likely?
Outside the box, it's a name that was rumored last year. I don't know if he'd be a fit now. Don't know if they could make it work. But someone who I thought would have been really cool in this roster would have been Claude Giroux. That's someone who I would have loved to have seen play in Edmonton. He still is capable of bringing a little bit of offense. He still is a valued asset for the Ottawa Senators, and he's someone who I thought would have been a great piece to add for a playoff push last year. So maybe that ship has sailed now for Edmonton, but hey, you never know. Claude Giroux is someone who I still think will look great in royal blue and orange.
That's an interesting pick. We spoke with Maude, and I don't know how we're gonna edit this episode up yet. We'll see if the Ottawa segment came before or after this one. But either spoiler alert or to recap, we talked a little bit about Claude Giroux and how that's definitely a piece that I'm sure a lot of teams quite like the Oilers who could maybe use a little bit of that experience and depth and stuff like that. Could be such a nice piece because that's a really high impact player. That's real fun. Maybe as the last kind of roster specific question that I want to ask, and maybe this is a sensitive topic. I'm not too sure. My finger on the pulse at Edmonton is not always the strongest, but are you confident with Stu Skinner going in as your goaltender for the playoff run that the Oilers are hoping to go on, or are you looking to get some insurance pieces to help out back there?
I still am very much a big believer in Stuart Skinner. His game has improved from his one start in the bubble season in 2021 to what he's at now. He's shown that he can be a proper NHL starter. My concern is more about what if Stu gets tired or knock on wood, something else happens, because I really want to see his team possibly try and improve. Maybe it's not a top priority though, but helping out behind Stu, giving him a 1B or a better asset, and not not to bash Cam Pickard because he's been serviceable, but I want to see what this team can do to help give Stu a little bit more help when he does get tired, when he does get fatigued, or when he does have an off night going forward and going into, say, a playoff series in April against the Vegas Golden Knights or against the Winnipeg Jets, for all we know. So I still believe in Stuart Skinner. It's just I would love to see him get some more help in a tandem if he does need a couple of nights off.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with a goaltender that's been kind of hot and cold in a couple stretches. Those insurance pieces can go a long way, and you never know when you might need them. But to sort of wrap up this conversation, just kind of looking ahead, obviously the off season coming up, you got quite a few guys with the little red UFA on cap friendly there. A couple guys that have some decisions to make this upcoming off season. Just what's your quick preview of what we think we might see with some of these players? Say as opposed to changing this conversation, no longer as of mid-March, who's no longer an Edmonton Oiler. Let's look a little bit further, including the trade deadline and looking at your roster right now. Say it's the beginning of September, guys who are on the team right now, who do you think is no longer an Edmonton Oiler come either the end of trade deadline or free agency?
Ooh, that is a great question. I do think next year this is going to be a team in which Cody Ceci will no longer be on this roster. I think he's a guy that they do find a way to part ways with. I think Warren Fogel's going to be a very iffy name. I'm not sold on him coming back to Edmonton next year. I mean, strange things have happened, so we'll see. I think Corey Perry's another name. With Corey Perry is going to be another guy who I'm not so certain of Corey Perry returning next year. I mean, I think he's a rental guy for just this year, and then next year, well, we'll see what happens. Another name I know it's a name that has detractors and some people who support him is Evander Kane. He is another name in which it's very hit or miss if he's going to be back here next year. I know there's a camp of, no, you can't deal him, or no, make sure he's here next year. He has 21 goals this year, but other parts of his play have been very iffy. So it wouldn't shock me if the Oilers try to find a way to move on from Evander Kane for next season.
Interesting, yeah. So I guess there's some couple guys in blue and orange that could be on the move over the next couple weeks, next couple months. So definitely an interesting team to keep an eye on because they're a team that has, arguably more talent than almost any other team in the league, but also a couple of holes that they'll probably want to address going into this playoff. So thank you for joining me today, Avry. It's been a ton of fun.
And of course, a huge thank you goes out to Avry for joining us here on the show. But now you guys all know what time it is. It's time to chat about the final team in Canada. Of course, it is the Winnipeg Jets. Alyssa and I sat down to have a little chat about the Jets post Sean Monahan and chat about the potential of the Jets making another move.
All right. And to wrap us up with our Canadian tour, we're going back to the heart of the country, the Salt Lake City Jets. Just kidding. We are going to talk about what we think the Winnipeg Jets maybe should do, what they could do with the trade deadline coming up over the next couple of weeks. So I think what we'll do is we'll probably split this up into the should and will because, we know the Winnipeg Jets. We know how conservative they are. We know they've already made the Sean Monahan splash like we've spoken about and all those kinds of things. So the should conversation is going to be a lot more interesting, I think, than the will conversation. But let's start with the will and just kind of get that out of the way. Brady, what do you think the Winnipeg Jets are going to do over the next couple weeks?
Well, the easiest way to kind of predict this is to look at previous results. What has Kevin Cheveldayoff done at the deadline in the past? 1, he likes to surprise us. 2, he likes to go for the not so bougie pick, but rather the kind of underground, maybe a little bit of a cheaper option. For me, like this, it seems like the Jets obviously have given up their one of their more valuable assets that they would be willing to part with in their first round pick for Sean Monahan. So my opinion, like I think the Jets will add someone. I would assume on the defensive side of things. There's been so much talk and flirting between the Jets and the Flyers. Like I feel like a Sean Walker trade of some sorts is around the corner. I would hope and assume. But other than that, like I could see the Jets maybe adding some sort of winger up top, maybe a middle six guy to potentially jump in that top six as they're still trying to figure out what really works there. But I think they still kind of have some unused options they haven't really looked at, like Nino Niederreiter. But like I wouldn't expect the big splash in my opinion. Like as much as I would love to sit here and go, get Chris Tanev, get Noah Hannafin, whoever you want. Rasmus Anderson apparently is in the talks.
Why wouldn't it be?
I just don't see Chevy paying the price, especially considering how much he's already paid at this point. What about you?
Interesting. So you think that they actually will make 2 more trades? And I am of the mind that I think they will make 2 more trades if the combined cap hit is less than $5 million kind of thing. Like if they make another bigger piece, I think that's kind of it. But I could see them adding that, $1.5 million defenseman on the back end as an insurance piece and maybe a forward as well kind of thing. But I don't foresee them, like you were kind of saying, making the big splash or anything like that. I think a Sean Walker ballpark, that would be a beautiful trade. I'd be very pleased if they could do that. We know the scouts have been around the Manitoba Moose, so maybe we'll be shipping a prospect or 2 out if needed for that
Stanley.
one. But
Logan Stanley, a prospect.
Logan Stanley's not playing for the Moose Dog. I don't know.
And he's not a prospect.
He's
anymore.
just a guy. But let's move into the more interesting conversation. What would you like to see the Winnipeg Jets do to make this team a contender even more than they already are?
Yeah, for me, like, here's the thing. This is always the one I go to. A great show, Breaking Bad. Everyone loves it. One of the most important lines in the show: no half measures. The Jets have already traded their first-round pick for Sean Monahan. They already are looking at in the cabinets going, okay, we have a bunch of guys here. We still have picks come in the upcoming draft. We still have a Montreal second-round pick, which is almost a late first, depending on where they finish here. For me, like, it's so rare that these opportunities present themselves. And even looking back on last year, I know obviously there's a lot of issues with the room and that kind of caused some of the downfall for the Jets. But I think that a good part of that was the confidence being lost by the team. I think bringing what they did this year and bringing in Sean Monahan when they did was a good thing to make sure that the Jets know that, the organization's behind them. They think that this is the year to go for it. And yeah, I look at this and I go, there shouldn't be any half measures here. You look at a guy, we had a video just the other day talking about, should you be willing to trade this guy? The Jets, there should be only maybe a couple guys who you go, they're untouchable in regards to what is realistic. And those are maybe guys like Rutger McGroarty, and because potentially, he could be on the team by the end of the season. But I digress. At this point, like a guy like Colby Barlow should not be considered any sort of untouchable piece for the Jets. That guy will not have any effect on the window that they're currently in. And hopefully is a guy who has a lot of clout around the league. I just look at this and I go, the options are there. You've got guys like Noah Hannafin, Chris Tanev. You've got guys, Pavel Buchnevich. The other day, I think it was Friedman said that he expects him to be traded by the end, by the trade deadline. Even guys like Adam Henrique is still, he's an expensive piece, but is an option. There's a lot of really interesting options on the board here this year, and I just look at this league right now. I look at how the West is going. Yeah, you still have your Vegases who are doing well. You still have guys like Colorado, but they're still they're kind of barely holding on to it in regards to keeping their window open. They're still, a great team, obviously, but right now feels like a good time to strike, especially with the place that the Jets have gotten themselves into with having Scheifele and Hellebuck re-sign this year. They're as far as age curves go, they're only going to get older and probably worse. So the Jets got to go for it. Like they have to make some sort of deal in before the trade deadline, at least one, maybe two. Depending on where you stand. But I think a defenseman is kind of a need at this point to try and push, maybe push Neil Pionk down potentially if you can afford to have Dylan DeMello on the second pair, or again having two strong top pairs with, we already know Morrissey DeMello works, having a guy next to Brennan Dillon or Dylan Sandberg in that second pair. Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be in Winnipeg, that's for sure. Sorry to go on so long.
Yeah,
Liz,
no.
what do you think?
Well, it's interesting because I think the other piece of this is that we talk about the window, and this year is a big one. But there are more years to come. And last year, for example, when the Winnipeg Jets traded for Nino Niederreiter, I think that was actually a year ago today. I got a Snapchat memory of me telling my dad about this. It was funny. They traded for a guy that had an extra year on his deal, so he wasn't at the top of that trade list because, obviously those are usually the pending UFAs and RFAs that are up there. But then it ended up working out that, we got this guy this year, and didn't have to worry about him this summer. Absolute gem. They loved him. They extended him, so we got him now longer. Like, I could see the Jets. I honestly, since they spent as much as they did on Sean Monahan, who is like the definition of a rental, I anticipate that if they were to make more than one trade, I foresee one of them being someone who has a little bit more term on that deal than just the next upcoming summer UFA season coming. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like that feels very Jets, and
it does. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Both in the sense of those guys usually aren't as on the board as advertised to be traded, but at the same time,
not as much of a bidding war for sure.
And at the same time, with the whole like, oh, it's hard to get players to play here. So okay, if a guy's got a contract, he kind of has to play here,
Yeah.
So yeah, like that, I feel like that totally fits. But at the same time, I kind of look at it and I go, is this right for them? They've got a lot of UFAs, so it makes a lot of sense, but they don't have a lot of UFAs up front. And you've got guys like Cole Perfetti who are still going to be, he'll be getting a new deal. He's an RFA, but the only UFA going into next year is Sean Monahan. So everyone is still locked up on that front end, but I don't know. And you've still got guys like Rucker McGroarty, who's probably going to be trying to break into the lineup next year. I don't know. Like it
could be a defenseman.
It could be a defenseman.
Like, I don't know.
And that makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, the Jets have been saying for how long they're trying to, make ways for younger players.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because like I agree with you that I could see that happening, and it makes a lot of sense in the Jets book. I'm just wondering if I don't know. Like I fall back on Chevy will only take the deals that he feels he's winning, which is good. That's good for a GM to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like they've already spent a lot where they're going to go, okay, you know what? We've already done this. If things are getting a little complicated, we'll reassess in the summer. Like, I don't know. Like, I know it's their job. This is their job, and this is what they have to do. But sometimes, it's easier to just go, I'm happy with what we did. And I could see the Jets having that sort of mentality in regards to it. Because I could see just like those deals are always tough to get done, I would say.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of like sum up the conversation and wrap it up, I think the Jets are the team that, like you said, they want to win the trades. And sometimes if you want to win, you have to be okay with losing a trade in the sense of you're going to overpay just to get the guy. And I don't think the Jets are going to do that. So it'll be interesting to see if there's ever a situation where they need to. I'm glad that they haven't done much of that before because, I haven't considered a Winnipeg Jets team to be as much of a contender in the last couple of years as I do right now. So I'll be interested to see if there are any conversations that Kevin Cheveldayoff walks away from because he thinks the price is getting too high. And I respect that. But at the same time, you're also walking away with no asset at all. That's helping your team win right now in those situations. So it is a little bit of a tricky one. But I think it'll be quieter for the Jets in the next couple of weeks. I think they'll probably make a couple of those depth insurance trades like they always do, the Jordy Benz, the Matt Hendricks, the whatever of the world. I don't know. But Chevy's been surprising me lately with some of the player trades that he's made, and I've been kind of impressed with some of the pieces he's brought in, the Vlad Nemestikov, the Nino Niederreiter, and all those kinds of things. So I don't know. I'm interested and I'm open to seeing what he's gonna do. My guess, final prediction, 2 trades, less than $5 million in cap space being brought in.
My final prediction, Chris Tanev. And that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. Something just tells me that they think that they can figure out the forward side of things on their own. And they've already
All
traded.
right.
They already traded for Monahan. You traded for a second line center already. So you already paid a first. You should hopefully have fixed what you needed to. But it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So that's a wrap. We got 7 Canadian markets that have some potentially very interesting next few weeks coming up. Got some great guests coming on, chatting about all those things. Definitely going to be keeping our finger on the pulse with what's going on with all of these teams in the next little bit. We got some really, really high highs going on and some real low lows with a couple of these teams. So it'll be very interesting to see how the next couple of weeks go. Thank you so much to all of our guests that were able to join us to talk about this. It's awesome to be able to get some fabulous perspectives from people who know these teams so intimately to come on and share all of their wealth of knowledge with us. So we really appreciate everyone coming on. We're going to plug all of their socials in the description and all that good stuff. So make sure you follow them on Twitter, subscribe to their channels if that's where they promote their content. Fabulous people, even more fabulous hockey minds. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode.
But as Liz said, make sure to check out all of our fantastic guests. But also make sure you do drop a like and a subscribe for us. We're constantly putting out new stuff. Let us know what you want to see from us. If you like this type of content, if you want to see more of more stuff like the video we did the other day, make sure to check that out as well on the trade deadline and an asset assessment. But thanks again for tuning in. Have yourselves a wonderful day.